The Stakeholder Theory. This presentation is split in two segments. The first segment gives an introduction into the Stakeholder Theory. The second segment looks at the application of the Stakeholder Theory through review of the study conducted by P. Kent and C. Chan of the application of the Stakeholder Theory to the quantity and quality of Australian voluntary corporate environmental disclosures. First, let's start by discussing accounting theories. What is an accounting theory? An accounting theory can be one of two things: an idea, opinion, or speculation, or an explanation or prediction based on observation or reasoning. There are four main branches of accounting theory: positive, normative, system-orientated, and regulation. In this presentation, we are going to look at the system-orientated branch, and more specifically, stakeholder theory. System-orientated theories are based on the belief that the organisation is part of a wider social system. The stakeholder theory was originally proposed by Edward Freeman, who believed in emphasis on corporate social responsibility, a concept that recognises the responsibilities of corporations in their internal and external operating environment. The stakeholder theory suggests that the purpose of the organisation is to create as much value as possible for all stakeholders alike. It suggests that in order for an organisation to succeed and be sustainable over time, executive management must keep the interests of all stakeholders aligned and going in the same direction. Other accounting theories, such as the shareholder theory, place emphasis on creating value for only the shareholders. Stakeholder interests may not always be the same and sometimes may be conflicting. Shareholders generally want the business to be run to create as much profit as possible, as supported by the shareholder theory. However, stakeholders may not always be happy with decisions that are made solely to increase profits. An example of this in New Zealand is when Cadbury changed to using palm oil in their chocolate products to save money. Although this increased profits for the shareholders, the environmental damage associated with palm oil outraged some stakeholders. This led to consumers boycotting the Cadbury brand by not buying any of their products. As Cadbury didn't consider all of their stakeholders, they ended up losing a lot of money and in the end removed palm oil from their products. There are two main branches of the stakeholder theory: the ethical normative branch and the managerial positive branch. The ethical normative branch states that all shareholders have rights and these rights should not be violated. This branch asserts that regardless of whether stakeholder management leads to improved financial performance, managers should manage the business for the benefit of all stakeholders. The managerial positive branch seeks to explain and predict how an organisation will react to the demands of various stakeholder groups. Within the managerial branch, the organisation identifies its group of stakeholders, focusing on those who will be important to the ongoing operation of the business. The greater the importance of particular stakeholders, the greater the expectation that the management of the firm will take action to manage relationships with those stakeholders. As the expectations and power relativities of various stakeholder groups change, organisations must continually adapt their operating and disclosure strategies. Identifying stakeholders. A stakeholder can be defined as any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of the firm's objectives. There are two key criteria when determining the importance of stakeholders. These are proximity of the relationship and stakeholder power. General examples of stakeholders are interest groups, the public, consumers, the government, employees of the organisation, investors or shareholders, the media, industry bodies, and suppliers. It is important to distinguish between stakeholder issues and social issues. Stakeholder issues are issues that affect the stakeholders. Social issues may be an issue that arises anywhere in society. Under the stakeholder theory, organisations owe a duty to their stakeholders to consider how they are affected and review their concerns. However, organisations do not owe a duty to society to remedy General social concerns. Stakeholders connected to the organisation need to be considered, not the general society who are too far away from the organisation to be affected. The proximity of the relationship. Analysis of the stakeholders and environment allows stakeholders to be split into two categories, primary and secondary. Primary stakeholders are stakeholders whose continuing support for the corporation is required if the company is to continue as a going concern. Examples are shareholders, suppliers, employees, creditors, regulators, and customers. A secondary stakeholder is an individual or group who have the capacity to mobilize public opinion in favor of or in opposition to the firm. Examples of secondary stakeholders are consumer advocacy groups, the media, and environmental lobby groups. Stakeholder power. Stakeholder power may be classified as one of three types of power: voting power, economic power, and political power. Shareholders can exercise voting power by virtue of their equity stake in the firm. Customers, suppliers, and creditors are able to exercise economic power by switching to another firm, increasing prices, and withdrawing supply. Regulators and lobby groups are able to exercise political power. Segment 2 of this presentation reviews the application of the stakeholder theory and the study The Application of the Stakeholder Theory to the Quantity and Quality of Australian Voluntary Corporate Environmental Disclosures. The aim of this study was to determine if the stakeholder theory could help explain the quantity and quality of environmental disclosures in annual reports in a voluntary reporting setting. The study was conducted in Australia, where environmental reporting is still largely unregulated and therefore not considered to be a societal issue. This means that when environmental disclosures are included, they are voluntary and presumably for the benefit of the stakeholders. The study was conducted using Ullman's three-dimensional model of social responsibility disclosure, which is a theory derived from the managerial branch of Freeman's stakeholder theory, which we discussed in segment 1. Ullman's model has three dimensions: stakeholder power, strategic posture, and economic performance. As with the Freeman stakeholder theory, stakeholder power is defined as a stakeholder's degree of control over resources required by the firm. Strategic posture is introduced as the second dimension, as Ullman argued that different strategies in dealing with stakeholder demands were observed by firms. These range from avoidance of the demands to partial or total fulfillment of them. The strategic posture of a firm describes its mode of response towards social demands. An active posture is implied where a firm is continually monitoring its relationship with its key stakeholders and managing it to ensure that the relationship is as beneficial as possible for all parties. Developing social responsibility programs and disclosing the programs is an example of an active stakeholder management strategy. A firm displaying a passive posture is not monitoring its relationships with its stakeholders, nor taking steps to manage that relationship. The third dimension of the Ullman model is the past and present economic performance. This is because of the theory that the economic performance has an influence on the decision to report the social demands of its stakeholders. The economic performance of the firm is an important factor in determining whether or not to report a social issue because of the additional costs associated with being socially and environmentally responsible. In periods where the organisation is doing badly, the immediate objective of the organisation is to achieve economic sustainability, and this receives priority over all social demands. The first hypothesis of the study was that firms disclose more environmental information of higher quality when the firm's stakeholders have greater power. After considering the nature of the relationship between the stakeholders in the firm and the nature of the stakeholders' power, it was decided to limit the stakeholders to the primary stakeholders of the shareholders, creditors, and regulators, and one secondary stakeholder, the environmental lobby groups. The study found that the quality of the disclosures were highly correlated to the stakeholder power. The more the power of a stakeholder, the higher quality of the disclosures. The second hypothesis of the study was that firms displaying an active posture towards environmental issues disclose more environmental information of higher quality than firms displaying a passive posture. The two main indicators of an organization's strategic posture that were used in this study were the content of the mission statement of the firm and the absence or presence of social responsibility or environmental committees. The study found a high correlation between firms displaying an active posture to their issues and the quality and quantity of information disclosed. Firms that showed an active posture were more likely to disclose more information of a higher quality. The third and final hypothesis of the study was that firms with higher past or current economic performance disclose more environmental information of higher quality than firms with lower past or current economic performance. There are two measures used in the study to measure economic performance: accounting-based, such as the review of the financial statements, and market-based, which is how well the organization is performing in the current market. This is mostly measured through investor perspectives and share pricing. The use of accounting-based information has been criticized as it is historical and may have been subject to manipulation by management. However, market-based performance measurement has many limitations which may lead to it being less reliable. The study was not able to come to a conclusive result on this hypothesis. It did not appear that economic performance had an effect on the disclosure of information. However, the researchers suggested that this should require more information and should be further investigated. The conclusion of the study was that the quality and quantity of Australian voluntary corporate environmental disclosures could be explained by the stakeholder theory. Although hypothesis 3 was inconclusive, hypothesis 1 and 2 showed a high correlation. Thank you for watching my presentation on the stakeholder theory. A list of references follows.